Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am going to talk about Christmas books. Here you thought Christmas was over, right? It's December 28th. Maybe you're relieved that it's over. Maybe you've taken down all your Christmas decorations, but I am here to tell you something that you may or may not already know. But the 12 days of Christmas are actually after Christmas. In the retail world, of course, that makes more sense for them to be before Christmas so they can do all the Christmas sales and all that wonderful stuff. But it's actually a church thing, a liturgical thing, and the Christmas season runs from Christmas Day, December 25th, to January 5th, which is the day before Epiphany. And Epiphany is the day when many churches celebrate the coming of the Magi or the Three Kings to the Nativity, to the baby Jesus, etc. Little bit of trivia for you. So the 12 days of Christmas, December 25th to January 5th. There you go. And I don't have a partridge in a pear tree for you or any of those other things, but I do have some of the books that I listened to on audio this year. As you may remember from last year, I like to stock my phone or my iPod or whatever I'm listening to at the time with Christmas holiday books, so starting about after Thanksgiving, not before Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving. Usually I stock up on the Christmas books, I stock up on the holiday movies, I spend a lot of time with Hallmark, and this year was just insanely crazy. I didn't do a fraction of the Christmas stuff that I normally do. We didn't even put up a tree. Yep, that's how crazy it was. The most festive we were was that I put the garland and some lights on our mantle, and then I put our Christmas presents under the garland in front of the fireplace. Yeah, that's about as crazy as we got here in our house. At any rate, even though, Christmas is over, I do want to talk about some holiday books, including Hanukkah. It is still Hanukkah. That's almost over as well, but we are still in there. So what is today? The last day? The penultimate day? I have to look at the calendar. I can't remember. I apologize to my Jewish readers for not knowing that off the top of my head. Listeners and readers, you know what I mean. And then maybe some New Year's books as well. We'll just see how the episode goes and where the Spirit takes me. So let's actually talk about some audiobooks that I listened to. So one of the authors that I discovered this year that you may already know about, because she has clearly been around for a while. She has a lot of books to her name and a lot of holiday books to her name. Her name is Samantha Chase, and I encountered her on I think I was doing the free trial of Audible Escape. I don't know if you've ever tried that. Again, not being paid by Audible, but they have the Audible Escape, which you pay, I think, an extra fee each month, and then you can borrow books. It's not like the free credits that you get on Audible, but you can borrow as many books, as many titles as you want, and then return them as you're finished and get some more. Maybe there is a limit. I don't know. I did not test that to see how many I could borrow at once, but you do pay an extra fee. So I was trying the month-long free trial of that, and I discovered Samantha Chase and many of her holiday books. So I think I listened to 4 this year. I'm looking at my list. Yes, 4. The Christmas Cottage, Ever After, Christmas in Silver Bell Falls, and Holiday Spice. So the Christmas Cottage and Ever After are actually a duology, possibly more in the series. I think it's a duology if I'm remembering correctly. The Christmas Cottage, sounds very Christmassy, has all of those wonderful tropes of, unexpected encounters and awkward pasts and reuniting and all those good things. But it is at the heart of the story is this legend about the Christmas cottage that if you spend your wedding night there, then you will have a perfect, happy, wonderful, loving marriage, and that will last a very long time. And so this family has had it, and they have a tradition of Christmas Eve weddings, and their daughter is convinced that she is going to get married there on Christmas Eve. She's not, she's convinced, but she does have a fiance. There are plans in place, but things just aren't, going as smoothly as they could. And throughout the course of this, she convinces her maid of honor that she needs to go and decorate the Christmas cottage to her specifications for the wedding night, and she has a lot of them. So the maid of honor does, and she happens to encounter the best man, who is also the bride's brother, and her secret crush from childhood, whom she hasn't talked to in 12 years since they had 12 or 14 years since they had a very awkward encounter when he was leaving for college and she was 14, and she tried to kiss him and told him that she loved him, and he just sort of freaked out and left for college. Yeah, you see, all those good tropes. So one thing leads to another, as you can imagine. They have an encounter in the Christmas cottage. Let's just go with that. I think you can probably draw conclusions of your own as to what that encounter entailed, which just then the bride is very, very unhappy, and it goes from there. So the first book is about the best friend and the brother, and then the second book, Ever After, focuses on the bride from this first book, the sister who doesn't end up marrying the fiance in the first book. And I know that's a spoiler, but you probably already guessed that she was getting married for many, many, many of the wrong reasons. And so she has to figure out, okay, so she didn't have her perfect Christmas wedding. She didn't have her perfect happy ever after. What does that mean? Who is she going to find? And then her story takes place a little bit around the holidays. Both stories have Thanksgiving in them. Both stories have a little bit of Christmas in them, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and then you get more of the rest of the family. Although, here's the thing. This is two families that are very, very close, and these kids grew up together. That's why the two main characters are best friends, and how the brother is involved. But in the second book, after the couple in the first book got together, in the second book, her family just kind of disappears. It's always about the in-laws, which are the parents of the main character in this second book, and that makes sense. But her parents are nowhere to be found, even though they live in the same town and they were, supposedly all best friends with the other parents in the first book. They're just, not one single mention of them throughout the book. I found that very, very weird. Okay, so there you go. Two Christmas stories from Samantha Chase, two holiday stories. I also listened to, you know what I mean, a book called Holiday by Gaslight by Mimi Matthews. So this was a historical fiction Christmas story taking place in the Victorian era. Surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, but surprisingly intense for a Victorian era romance, because there is, no encounter, if you will. I don't know why I'm using euphemisms tonight. It's not like I can't just say sex, but it's the Victorian era, so they court in very different ways than we would think of courting now. But just the thought of, maybe holding hands or possibly kissing at some point it sends the heroine all aflutter. But I was actually impressed by how the author, Mimi Matthews is the author again, how the author managed to, really build up that tension and make there be romance and, some sexual tension in this story where you maybe don't expect it in the repressed world of the Victorian era. So let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, I'll actually give you the description of Holiday by Gaslight. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am doing a late Christmas/holiday book fest, whatever you want to call it. And before the break, I was talking about A Holiday by Gaslight, which is one of the audiobooks that I listened to in the month of December. And I said I would give you the description, so here it is. It's a courtship of convenience. Sophie Apposett is quite willing to marry outside of her class to ensure the survival of her family, but the darkly handsome Mr. Edward Sharp is no run-of-the-mill London merchant. He's grim and silent, a man of little emotion, or perhaps no emotion at all. After 2 months of courtship, she's ready to put an end to things. But severing ties with her taciturn suitor isn't as straightforward as Sophie envisioned. Her parents are outraged, and then there's Charles Darwin, Prince Albert, and the dratted Gaslight. What's a girl to do except invite Mr. Sharp to Apposett House for Christmas and give him one last chance to win her? Only this time there'll be no false formality. This time they'll get to know each other for who they really are. And the cover is beautiful. It's got this beautiful Victorian red dress on the woman on it. It's a Christmas novella, so it's not a terribly long listen or read, depending on where you're going with that. It was published last year, November 13th, 2018, so fairly recent. And it's got, well, first of all, I really love that description, that line in the description where it says, and then there's Charles Darwin, Prince Albert, and that dratted Gaslight. What's a girl to do? Except clearly invite this Mr. Darcy-like character or this Mr. the Rochester-like character to her home for the Christmas party, which is one of those grand Victorian Christmas party that lasts 10 days or something and is very elaborate and has all kinds of craziness happening. You're going to have to read and or listen to the book to find out what Charles Darwin, Prince Albert, and the Gaslight have to do with this story, although it is called Christmas by Gaslight. I really enjoyed this one. I mean, it had a very definite sort of Jane Eyre feel to it. I mean, Jane Austen feel to it, where they didn't particularly care for like each other in the beginning. He's grumpy. She wants more. She's very plain spoken, very blunt in her speaking, to an extent. It's still the Victorian era. And I just thought it was fun, and it was much more romantic than you might expect from a Victorian novel. Now, it's, of course, a historical fiction Victorian novel. It's not written in the Victorian era. It takes place in the Victorian era, so you get a little bit more modern sensibilities in terms of the romance of this book. But I very much enjoyed this one, and I liked that there was a historical fiction component to this year's reading. Another one that I discovered this year was Home for the Holiday, HOLME for the Holiday, and it is a Americans Abroad. It's part of the Americans Abroad series, which is kind of what attracted me at first glance. This is the second in that series. It is by Miranda McLeod, which I think is kind of fun since we just had Miranda O on the podcast recently. So here is the description of this book, Home for the Holidays. An American musician with a broken heart meets a local farmer with a hidden past on a holiday house swap in Yorkshire. A charming romantic comedy that will fill your heart with holiday cheer. A country cottage is the last place Paige expected to spend the holidays, but a year after her girlfriend dumped her, her life is in shambles. A last-minute house swap sends her from California to Yorkshire to put her life back on track. She doesn't believe in forever anymore, but when she meets a raven-haired beauty in the local pub, she seizes the chance for a night of fun. On the brink of fame and fortune, Fiona suffered an unthinkable loss, and a year later she's given up on singing and just about everything else. When the brother she relies on too much skips town for her own good and loans his cottage to a stranger for the holidays, her life is turned upside down. She knows she can't make a new relationship work, but when she meets a purple-haired American at the local pub, she figures it wouldn't hurt to blow off some steam. They never meant to see each other again, yet from the very first morning when the vicar comes to call and Paige gets mowed down by a runaway llama, they just can't seem to escape their lives becoming increasingly and hilariously entwined. And when a series of calamities threatens Christmas in Home Village, the two must work together to save the day and maybe find true love along the way. A year ago, their lives fell apart. Can a bit of Christmas magic help them build a new life together? All right. So this book it's got all the classic tropes of a great Hallmark movie, of a great Christmas story. You know, you've got the funny elements that scene with the vicar and the llama. Yeah, that's got some definite strange and silly humor in it. I won't give anything away, but you may have noticed that this book is about two women. It's a romance about two women. Yes, it is. And maybe that seems strange to you, but I have to say, for the people in the back, some of you are just going to be like, well, yeah, duh, but just because it has two women as the main characters, you still get all of those great romance tropes, all those great romance things. I mean, you see that one character has broken up with her girlfriend. They had a pretty dysfunctional, unhealthy relationship. You have, the other character having suffered the loss of her girlfriend, and then they're brought together by these crazy circumstances. It's just it's your typical romance with two women. And again, for those of you who are sitting there saying, well, duh, I have to say, for those of you in the back who maybe are a little freaked out by LGBTQ romances, well, you don't have to read them, but they are very similar to the ones that you read, just a little bit different in terms of who is kissing whom in the books. And considering everything going on with Romance Writers of America this week, and if you don't know about that, this is not the place for me to go into it. It's a mess. It's a hot mess. Let me just tell you that. But considering what's going on there, I just feel the need to say, hey, two women as the protagonists in a romance, nothing wrong with that. Two men, same thing. They're going to have those same, it's going to follow those same patterns that you love in romances. They will meet. There will be attraction. There will be impossible circumstances, seemingly impossible circumstances that they must conquer and overcome, etc. I really enjoyed this. It's got all of my favorite things. It's in England. It has hilarious farm animals. That's really not something I put on my list of things to listen to or to read either way. But, there's a llama. Come on. Who doesn't want to read a Christmas book with a llama in it? There's drama. There's tension. There's crazy family members. There's crazy village members. All sorts of good stuff happening in this book. So, I am looking forward to reading some of the other books in this series by Miranda McLeod. Again, it is the Americans Abroad series. And this one, as I said, is number 2, and it came out in 2016. So, it's been out for a while. Maybe you've already read it. Maybe you've read the other books in the series. You can definitely tell me in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this series, the Americans Abroad series by Miranda McLeod. Okay, so probably enough of my blah, blah, blahing about LGBTQ novels. I mean, we don't need to hammer it home. For those of you who are, again, sitting there going, yeah, duh, hello, lady. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll finish up with the Christmas portion of this and then move on to Hanukkah and possibly New Year's, depending on the time. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC. Sarah is rambling on like a drunken elf hopped up on too much Christmas sugar podcast. Or, you know, the more traditional GSMC book review podcast. Really just depends on how you're feeling. I feel like a drunken elf hopped up on too much Christmas sugar. I haven't had that much sugar or caffeine today, but I feel like I'm just like blah, 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 blah today. Sorry about that. Too much Christmas. I don't know. At any rate, another book that I listened to and was also part of a series was also by Samantha Chase, and that was Holiday Spice, and that is the Shaughnessy Brothers series. This one actually is about the sister in that series. I think there are 6 brothers, and it's obvious when you listen to it that the 6 brothers have already had their own stories because they're all married, and you get snippets of those stories throughout Darcy, the sister's story. So it is part of that series. It's also by Samantha Chase and has a lot of the classic tropes. You know, they get snowed in. She gets snowed in, and after a kind of random set of circumstances bring her into contact with what will be, you know, with Will, with the love of her life, of course. And, you know, you gotta love the snowed in kind of theme because it's very Christmassy and very wintry, although they get snowed in October, which I've been there, and at any rate, it still feels kind of Christmassy, but yeah, it's still October. At any rate, that was another one that I read that was part of a series. And then I read a novella by Keeland and Pamela Ward. Let me just double check that I got that name right. Penelope Ward, excuse me. It's called The Christmas Pact. It is, as I said, a novella, and it is so classically Hallmarky because it involves 2 characters, Kennedy Riley and Riley Kennedy, who both just happen to work for the same company. Their email often gets mixed up, sent to the wrong person, and that leads to shenanigans, which lead to them making this Christmas pact wherein he will go home with her to pretend to be her boyfriend at Christmas, and she will go with him to his brother's wedding the following week. Simple enough, but of course nothing is ever simple in these types of books, and they have to get to learn to know each other and not, you know, be so judgmental and all those wonderful things that go into these classically Hallmarky books. And please know, if you haven't already figured this out about me, that when I say Hallmarky, I'm not using that derogatorily. I like Hallmark movies. I love and books that remind me of Hallmark movies. I can't help it. I like it. And then one more Samantha Chase book, just to mention Christmas in Silver Bell Falls, simply because it is about an author who is writing a Christmas book, even though she hates Christmas. And now she has to write this Christmas story, and she gets an inheritance from her grandmother that she's really never known, and it's a cabin in Silver Bell Falls, which constantly plays the song Silver Bells and drives her crazy, and she has to learn a lot about her grandmother and her life and her family and herself, and she has to write a Christmas story. Okay. And then finally, I think the last book, I think I maybe listened to more than this, but maybe not. It's enough. Was, my final book that I read from a series, even though I've never read any of these series, but need to go and check them out, is A Virgin River Christmas by Robyn Carr. I think this one came out in 2012, so it's been out for a while. And this is a full-length novel, takes place in and around Virgin River, California, and there's clearly been other books in this series. Again, you get, there's a heavy Marine presence in this book. Marine meaning the actual armed force. That's not right. Branch of the armed forces. There we go. In that the male main character was a Marine. The female main character's husband was a Marine. He was her husband's best friend, the other main character. In the town of Virgin River itself, there's many men who have been Marines. So there's a definite military theme in the books, patriotic theme running throughout those. So if that is something that you like to read in your romance, then you may want to check out A Virgin River Christmas or any of the other Virgin books set in Virgin River by Robyn Carr. I did enjoy that as well. Not maybe as silly and lighthearted. No, there's some definite silliness and lightheartedness in the book, but it's also got some pretty heavy themes in it as well, in terms of loss and PTSD and survivor's guilt and many, many other things. Okay. I have rambled on enough. I said I was going to try to get to New Year's. Not going to happen. But I do want to highlight one Hanukkah book that I have not had a chance to read, but it is written by an author who has been on the podcast, and that is Jennifer Wilk. I can't remember if I asked her this question when she was a guest on the podcast or if we had this conversation at another point, not when we were recording, but it was last year around this time, a little earlier, and I was in the midst of my holiday reading, and I said, I would love to read books that are set around the time of Hanukkah and involve that tradition. And so then she didn't write this for me, obviously, but then it turns out that she has a novella that just came out this month. It's called Waiting for a Miracle, and it even has a menorah on the cover, so you know that it has something to do with Hanukkah. Here is the description of that. Benjamin Cohen, widowed father of 6-year-old Jesse, is doing his best to hold it together through order and routine. The last thing he needs is his matchmaker mother to set him up with her next-door neighbor, no matter how attractive she is. Rachel Schechter's dream of becoming a foster mother is right within her grasp, until her meddlesome neighbor tries to set her up with her handsome son. What's worse, he's the father of her favorite kindergarten student. She can't afford to let anything come between her and her dream, no matter how gorgeous he may be. Can these two determined people trust in the miracle of Hanukkah to let love and light into their lives? So there you go. That is the description of Waiting for a Miracle. It is by author Jennifer Wilk, who we have had on the podcast. And I said Wilkie earlier. I am so sorry about that. Too much sugar. Clearly too much sugar. Jennifer Wilk. There's no E on the end. W-I-L-C-K. I know this. Now you have the correct spelling. Jennifer, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, but thank you so much for writing a Hanukkah novella. I am very excited to read it and can't wait to, maybe it'll come out on audiobook and I can add it to my list to listen to next year, even though I plan on reading it before then. And when I do get a chance to read it, then I will let you know what I think. So, very excited to add Hanukkah to my holiday list of reading. What are your favorite holiday books? Are they Christmas? Are they Thanksgiving? Are they Hanukkah? Are they Kwanzaa? Are they New Year's? And if so, what are those books? Because obviously there are a plethora of Christmas stories out there, Christmas romances, but what about the other holidays around this time of year? And what about the ones that I'm not even mentioning or maybe don't know enough about? If you have books that you like to read that are holiday themed, but not necessarily Christmas themed. I mean, I still want to hear your Christmas suggestions, but I would love to hear your Hanukkah suggestions, your New Year's suggestions, your Kwanzaa suggestions, whatever it is that you enjoy reading and the holidays that you enjoy celebrating. Please let me know so I can add them to my list for next year. I am going to go, I don't know, drink some water or something, try to dilute the sugar in my system. I hope you had a wonderful holiday week. I hope that you are going to do something, whatever's fun for you for New Year's. Stay safe. And then join me on Tuesday for my final episode of 2019. I will have a returning guest on the podcast. That is author Debbie Burke. We will be talking about the second book in her Tawny Lindholm series, and this one is called Stalking Midas. If you want something to do between now and then, you should go back and listen to the episode she was on originally when we talked about the first book in this series. That was episode number 66, and of course, interview with Debbie Burke. If you want to go and either re-listen to that or listen to it for the first time before you listen to the interview on Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend, and I hope that you have plenty of time to not only get lost in a good book, but eat your weight in sugar, if that's what you so desire. I will talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.